What would happen if you threw a frail old lady out of a first floor window? And what does this have to do with knee pain when you're running? Runner's knee is a term that we often use to use as a kind of umbrella for a bunch of different conditions that commonly affect runners in the knee. So the most common one is patellofemoral pain, which is pain on the back of your kneecap. The next would be osteoarthritis, which is pain in the joint between the femur and the tibia, which is the thigh bone and the shin bone. Then you've got patellar tendinopathy or tendonitis, which is the pain in the tendon for the thigh muscle, which is a bit less common in runners, but does happen. And finally, IT band syndrome or IT band pain, which is pain in the IT band, which is a structure that is on the side of the knee, on the outside of the knee. And the term runner's knee came about because knee pain with running is unfortunately quite common among runners. And you may have heard that running is bad for your knees, and technically that's not true. Evidence shows that runners actually get less knee arthritis trouble as they age than non-runners because they're generally healthier, and the pounding, as they adapt to it, they become more robust and resilient, as we've talked about on this show before. But nevertheless, some runners do develop knee pain. It is fairly common, and today we're going to talk a little bit about why and what to do about it. And the primary reason that knee pain is quite common among runners is just because of the sheer amount of stress or force that is being experienced by the knee when you're running. So when you're running, as your foot strikes the ground, you exert a force down into the earth, and then the earth exerts an equal but opposite force back up into you. And they call that force the ground reaction force. Now, if you were just standing still, the ground reaction force that your knee would experience would be the same as your body weight. However, when you're running, because there is some speed involved, because you're putting putting the foot down with a degree of speed, the force that comes back up through your leg and is experienced by the knee is actually higher than just your body weight. In fact, when researchers have measured it, they found that on average, the forces that the knee experiences during each step when you're running are usually around 3 times your body weight. So if we would put that into context, if we had a female runner who weighed 120 pounds, she would experience forces in her left knee with each foot strike of around 360 pounds, so 3 times her body weight. And runners on average will take about 5,000 steps per hour when they're running each leg. So her left knee will experience that force about 5,000 times each hour. So that adds up to a grand total of around 1.8 million pounds of force going through the knee every hour when she's running. And the important thing to note here, because you might think, oh, that doesn't sound very good, is that it's just amazing that our body can adapt to that amount of stress and handle it just fine the vast majority of the time. However, sometimes runners do develop knee pain, and that's when the structures of their knee can't adapt to the stress being placed on them as we've just described it. But what does this have to do with a frail old lady being thrown out of a window? Well, if you imagine a frail 90-year-old woman, and if she were to be thrown out of a first floor window, what would happen to her? Well, when she hit the ground, she would probably break a bunch of bones. And that's because she lacks the strength and power in her muscles to absorb the forces her body's experiencing. So the force goes into the bones and breaks the bones. Now, if we contrast that with, let's say, like a 28-year-old gymnast who's very strong, and you throw that woman out the first floor window, she might break something, but she might just as easily be fine. And that's because she has far more strength and power in her muscles to attenuate the forces when she hits the ground. So essentially, it's like the forces that the body experiences are absorbed by the muscles instead of the bones. And that's why systematic reviews and meta-analyses on interventions for runners' knee, so when runners have knee pain, doing things to help them, the things that have been shown to be the most effective are strength training exercises. And in my opinion, that is because when you get runners and you make their muscles of their legs stronger and more powerful, they are better able to attenuate those forces so that less stress goes into the structures of the knee, like the back of the kneecap, the knee joint itself, the patellar tendon, and the iliotibial band. That means that you're less likely to overload those structures by exceeding their adaptive capacity, and makes it less likely that you're going to develop a repetitive stress injury, because the stress in those structures will be lower because the muscles have handled a lot of the stress instead of the structures having to handle it. And most runners are pretty much sold on strength training now. It's become quite a bit more common that runners understand that strength training is a helpful way to avoid injuries, to rehabilitate from injuries, and to improve performance. We've talked about it on this show quite a bit in the past. However, a lot of runners aren't doing it, and those that are usually are doing it too light. So if you're thinking about getting into some more strength training, or you think that your strength training needs to be improved, I have just a couple of simple suggestions you can implement to make sure that your strength training is actually affording you the protection that you want it to in your knees. So the first would be to pick compound exercises. So a good example would be squats or lunges. They've been shown to be very effective at helping runners overcome runner's knee. And the other important one that's often missed is calf raises, and that's because a lot of the stress and force that the leg experiences is attenuated by the calf when running. So if you were to take those two exercises, then you just need to make sure you're dosing them appropriately. So usually 2 times a week for most people is going to suffice. And then you also want to make sure that they're heavy enough. So this is a super common mistake we see with runners, is that their exercises are too easy and they're doing more like endurance maintenance strength training instead of real strength training. So a good way to know is to do 4 sets of 8 repetitions, and make sure that if you're doing 8 reps of a lunge, that the weight is so heavy that you can't do 9 or 10 reps. You can only just do 8. That'll ensure that you're into that strength building range, and that's going to make sure that your muscles are getting stronger in response to that exercise. And another thing that's commonly missed by runners in their strength training is the power element. So it's all well and good having the world's strongest muscles, but when you hit the ground and then push off again as you're running, you only take about a third of a second to do that. So if your muscles take a while to kind of get going, then they're not going to be very used to you being strong. They need to be able to activate and express that strength extremely quickly. So that's where the power training comes in. And power training, a good example would be a very simple exercise like a squat jump. So you squat down, jump as high as you can, and repeat 5 times. If you do it with dumbbells in your hands, even better. And then there's other exercises along that line where you could do box jumps or broad jumps or triple hops, that kind of thing, to really focus on explosive power. The other thing that I really like for endurance runners is sprint intervals. So 50-meter or 100-meter sprint intervals can be really helpful at building power in the muscles when accompanying a good strength training program. And it's very specific to running and enjoyable. And there's then some carryover in terms of anaerobic capacity and VO2 max benefits as well. So if you're having knee pain when you're running, remember, you want you to be more like the 28-year-old gymnast with strong, powerful muscles in your legs, and less like the frail old lady who can't attenuate the stresses that you're going to experience when you run. And if you're stuck and you can't seem to get anywhere on your own, getting past your knee pain, of course, we can help you. Just click the link in the description to book a call and we'll have a chat, see what we can do.